I'm Claire, and 3 months ago I watched my sister parade around in my grandmother's redesigned wedding dress, soaked in fake blood and torn to shreds, while her friends laughed and took photos for her Halloween party. She called it art. I called it the final betrayal, but what she didn't know was that I'd been saving something special for Christmas morning, wrapped in papers that would make her holiday unforgettable. Sometimes revenge comes in the prettiest packages, tied with the perfect bow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first time I realized my family had a favorite, I was 8 years old, standing in our kitchen on Maple Street, watching my mother carefully fold Vanessa's school art project while mine sat crumpled in the trash. Vanessa had drawn a stick figure family where everyone held hands, except for one figure standing alone in the corner. That figure had my name written underneath it in purple crayon. Mom hung Vanessa's drawing on the refrigerator and told her how creative she was. When I asked why my drawing wasn't good enough for the fridge, Mom said I needed to try harder to make things that mattered. That should have been my first warning sign, but children are resilient in the worst possible way. We convince ourselves that love is something we can earn if we just figure out the right formula. For me, that formula became perfection. Straight A's, volunteer work, helping neighbors, never causing trouble. I thought if I could just be good enough, patient enough, selfless enough, they would see me the way they saw Vanessa. Vanessa, meanwhile, perfected the art of being effortlessly adored. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they'd been waiting for her to arrive. Teachers loved her despite her mediocre grades. Friends flocked to her despite her tendency to disappear when she got bored. And our parents, well, they treated her like she was made of spun gold, while I was just the sturdy copper coin in their pocket, always there, but never quite as shiny. The pattern followed us through high school and into our 20s. When Vanessa dropped out of college to pursue social media influencing, our parents called it entrepreneurial spirit. When I graduated summa cum laude and became an elementary school teacher, they asked when I was going to get a real job that paid better. When Vanessa moved in with Marcus after knowing him for 3 months, they threw her an engagement party. When I dated Tyler for 2 years before accepting his proposal, they asked if I was sure I wasn't settling. But the wedding dress, that was supposed to be different. That was supposed to be mine. I had been dreaming about wearing Grandma Rose's dress since I was 12 years old. It was a 1952 vintage masterpiece, ivory silk with hand-sewn pearls, and the most delicate lace sleeves that looked like they were spun from moonlight. Grandma Rose had worn it when she married Grandpa Joe in a small ceremony at St. Mary's downtown. She'd kept it wrapped in tissue paper and lavender sachets for 70 years, waiting for the right granddaughter to give it new life. When Tyler proposed on a rainy Tuesday evening in our favorite booth at Blue Mountain Cafe, the first thing I thought about wasn't the ring or the future we'd build together. It was walking down the aisle in Grandma Rose's dress, finally being the center of attention for all the right reasons, finally having something that was unquestionably, indisputably mine. I called Mom that night, breathless with excitement. Tyler proposed, and Mom, I know this is probably premature, but I've been thinking about Grandma Rose's dress, and I was wondering if maybe, oh honey, Mom interrupted, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'm so happy for you, but sweetie, Vanessa already claimed that dress. She's been talking about it since she was little. You know how sentimental she is about family traditions. The words hit me like ice water. Vanessa was dating Marcus. Sure, but they'd been together for 8 months. There was no ring, no proposal, no actual wedding on the horizon. But somehow, she had already claimed the one thing I'd dreamed about since childhood. But Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, Tyler and I are actually engaged. We're planning a real wedding. Vanessa and Marcus haven't even talked about marriage. Well, that doesn't mean they won't, Mom said with that tone she used when she'd already made up her mind. And Vanessa mentioned it first. Besides, you're so practical. Claire, you'll find something beautiful that fits your budget. You know how to make things work. That phrase again, you know how to make things work. It was Mom's way of saying I was expected to be the reasonable one, the one who stepped aside, the one who smiled and nodded while Vanessa got whatever she wanted. I hung up the phone and sat in my small apartment, staring at the engagement ring that suddenly felt heavy on my finger. Tyler was in the shower, humming off-key, and probably planning how he'd tell his parents the good news. He had no idea that our engagement announcement had already been overshadowed by a dress that might never even see another wedding. 2 weeks later, Vanessa called me with news that she and Marcus had decided to elope to Vegas. No ceremony, no family, just a quick trip to a chapel and a celebration dinner when they got back. She was giggly and breathless on the phone, talking about how romantic and spontaneous it would be. And the best part, she said, is that I won't need a fancy dress or any of that traditional stuff. We're doing this our way. You know, just us and Elvis. I should have said something then. I should have asked about Grandma Rose's dress, should have pointed out that an Elvis chapel in Vegas was hardly the place for a vintage family heirloom, but I didn't. I congratulated her and told her I was happy for her, because that's what good sisters do, that's what the reasonable one does. 3 months after their Vegas wedding, Tyler and I started planning our ceremony. We'd set the date for the following October, giving us almost a year to save money and organize everything. I'd found a beautiful venue at Willow Creek Country Club. Nothing too fancy but elegant enough for the family photos that would hang on walls for decades. I'd chosen a color scheme of deep burgundy and gold, perfect for an autumn wedding. I'd even found a seamstress who specialized in vintage alterations, but I still didn't have a dress. Every time I brought up Grandma Rose's gown, Mom would deflect. Let's see what happens. Or Vanessa's still thinking about having a real ceremony later. Or my personal favorite, you don't want to put pressure on your sister when she's still adjusting to married life. Adjusting to married life apparently meant posting daily Instagram stories about her fabulous new apartment, her amazing husband, and her plans to become a lifestyle influencer. Vanessa had accumulated nearly 50,000 followers by documenting her newlywed bliss, complete with professionally shot photos of her morning coffee routine and sponsored posts about skincare products. Meanwhile, I was teaching second grade, coming home to grade papers and planning a wedding with the dress-shaped hole at its center. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in September. I was at my parents' house for our monthly family dinner, something Mom insisted on to maintain our close family bond. Tyler was there, charming dad with stories about his job at the engineering firm, and Vanessa was live streaming her dinner plate for her followers while Marcus scrolled through his phone. "The salad looks amazing, Mom," Vanessa said to her camera, not to our actual mother. "I'm so blessed to have a family that supports my wellness journey. You guys should totally try this dressing recipe. It's literally life-changing." Mom beamed like Vanessa had just announced a cure for cancer instead of endorsing a salad. After dinner, while Vanessa was in the bathroom touching up her makeup for more content, I cornered Mom in the kitchen. "Mom, I need to ask you about the dress again. My wedding is in 6 weeks. The seamstress needs at least a month for alteration. If Vanessa isn't planning a ceremony, I don't understand why." "Claire, honey, lower your voice," Mom whispered, glancing toward the hallway. "Vanessa's been having a rough time lately. Marcus has been working long hours and she's feeling a bit neglected. She mentioned that having a proper wedding ceremony might help them reconnect. She's been posting about how perfect her marriage is literally every day," I said, trying not to sound as frustrated as I felt. "That's just social media, sweetheart. You know how these young influencers, they have to maintain an image. But privately she's been struggling. And you know how sensitive she's always been." Sensitive, that was Mom's code word for explaining away every time Vanessa got exactly what she wanted at everyone else's expense. "What about me being sensitive?" I asked. "What about my feelings? I've been dreaming about that dress since I was 12. Mom sighed and started loading the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "Claire, you're 28 years old. You're a grown woman with a career and a stable relationship. Vanessa is still figuring things out. She needs our support right now. I need support too, Mom. I'm getting married in 6 weeks. And I don't have a wedding dress because my sister has claimed one she might never even wear." "You'll find something beautiful," Mom said dismissive. "You're so resourceful, and think about how much money you'll save buying something new, instead of paying for all those vintage alterations." That night, I drove home in silence while Tyler tried to make conversation about centerpieces and seating charts. He could tell something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to explain that my own mother had essentially told me I wasn't worth fighting for, that my sister's hypothetical needs trumped my actual wedding. The next morning, I did what I should have done months earlier. I went dress shopping alone. The boutique downtown had a small selection of sample dresses in my size, and the consultant was kind enough to let me try on a few options even though my budget was obviously limited. I found a simple but elegant gown, nothing like the vintage masterpiece I'd dreamed of, but pretty enough for photos and within my price range. As I stood in the fitting room, looking at myself in a dress that was fine but not special, I made a decision. I was done waiting for permission to live my life. I was done being the understanding one, the reasonable one, the one who stepped aside so Vanessa could have whatever caught her fancy. I bought the dress. 2 days later, I got a text from Vanessa. OMG, Claire, I just had the best idea for my Halloween party. You know how I've been wanting to do a zombie bride theme. Marcus suggested I use Grandma Rose's dress and distress it for the costume. It'll be so epic for content. Mom said you'd be totally cool with it since you already found a dress. Love you. I read the message 3 times, each time feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. She wanted to turn our grandmother's wedding dress into a zombie costume. She wanted to tear it, stain it with fake blood, and parade around in it for Instagram likes. The dress that had been hand-sewn with love in 1952, that had been carefully preserved for 70 years, that represented everything I'd ever wanted from my family's tradition. And Mom had apparently already given her permission. I called Mom immediately. "Oh Claire, I'm so glad Vanessa told you," Mom said before I could even speak. "Isn't it creative? She's always been so artistic. And since you already found a dress for your wedding, it seemed silly to let Grandma's dress just sit in the closet gathering dust. Mom, she wants to destroy it. She wants to rip it up and cover it in fake blood. It's just a dress, honey, and it's not like Grandma's here to see it. Vanessa promised she'll be careful with the important parts." "What important parts?" "It's a 70-year-old family heirloom." "Claire, you're being dramatic. It's Halloween. It's supposed to be fun, and Vanessa's followers will love seeing her in something so vintage and unique. Think of all the engagement she'll get." I hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, Tyler found me sitting on our couch, staring at my phone, and the photos Vanessa had already posted of herself modeling the dress. She'd captioned it, "Zombie Bride Transformation Coming Soon. This vintage beauty is about to get the spooky makeover of her dreams. Stay tuned for the most epic Halloween content ever." The comments were full of fire emojis and people praising her creativity. Several followers asked where she'd found such an authentic vintage dress, and she'd responded with "family heirloom. Sometimes the best costumes come from your own closet." "What's wrong?" Tyler asked, sitting beside me and gently taking the phone from my hands. I told him everything. The years of being overlooked, the dress I'd dreamed about, the wedding that was supposed to be perfect, and now this final insult. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each detail. "You know what?" he said when I finished. "Maybe it's time to stop being the reasonable one." I looked at him, this man who loved me enough to propose, even though my family treated me like an afterthought. And something inside me shifted. Something that had been bent and accommodating for 30 years finally straightened its spine. "You're right," I said. "Maybe it is." The Halloween party was on a Saturday night, at the community center on Pine Avenue. Vanessa had rented the space and invited half the town, turning it into a massive content creation event, with professional lighting, and a photographer to capture every moment of her zombie bride transformation. I didn't go to the party. I didn't need to see her wearing the ruins of my childhood dreams while her followers celebrated her creativity, but I did see the photos the next morning, when she posted them across all her social media platforms. Grandma Rose's dress was unrecognizable. The delicate lace sleeves had been shredded, the hand-sewn pearls ripped off and scattered on the floor, and the ivory silk was stained with what looked like gallons of fake blood. Vanessa posed dramatically in each shot, her arms raised like she was rising from the grave, the destroyed gown hanging off her in tatters. The caption read, Obsessed with how this turned out. Nothing says Halloween like turning something old and boring into something absolutely iconic. This vintage dress was literally just collecting dust, but now it's art. Sometimes you have to destroy something to create something beautiful. Zombie bride vibes forever. The post got over 10,000 likes in 6 hours. I screenshotted everything. 3 weeks later, Tyler and I had our wedding at Willow Creek Country Club. It was a beautiful October day, the kind where the leaves are just starting to turn and the air carries the promise of winter without the bite. My dress was perfect. My hair was perfect. Tyler cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, but Vanessa wasn't there. She'd called the morning of the wedding with elaborate apologies about a last-minute brand collaboration opportunity that she absolutely couldn't miss. Something about a weekend retreat with a skincare company that wanted to feature her morning routine. The timing was unfortunate, she said, but surely I understood how important her career was. Mom was disappointed, but not surprised. You know how driven Vanessa is, she said while helping me into my dress. She's building something really special with her platform. Dad walked me down the aisle, and for those few hours, I felt like I was finally the center of my family's attention. People toasted Tyler and me, danced to our favorite songs, and told us how perfect we looked together. It should have been the happiest day of my life, but there was an empty space at the family table where my sister should have been, and everyone kept asking where she was. I smiled and made excuses, but inside I was calculating the cost of her absence. She'd missed my wedding for a skincare campaign, but I was supposed to understand. I was supposed to be reasonable. The breaking point came 2 months later, in December. I was Christmas shopping downtown when I ran into Marcus at the coffee shop. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks, and when he saw me he actually looked relieved. "Claire, thank God," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I've been wanting to talk to you, but Vanessa said you guys weren't speaking." "We're not speaking," I said carefully. "We just haven't talked much since Halloween." Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Yeah, Halloween, that was something else, wasn't the great zombie bride spectacle that cost me my marriage." I looked at him more carefully. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had that hollow look that people get when they're surviving on coffee and regret. "What do you mean?" "I mean the dress wasn't the only thing she destroyed that night," he said, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. "Turns out my wife is very good at creating content and very bad at being married. That whole Halloween party was basically her public audition for the single influencer lifestyle." My stomach dropped. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "She's been having an affair with her photographer for 3 months, he said simply. "The Halloween party was where she finally decided to make it official. Nothing says my marriage is over like destroying your grandmother's wedding dress and making out with another man in the room." I sat there speechless, watching this man I'd known for 2 years fall apart in a coffee shop booth. "The divorce papers were finalized yesterday," he continued. "She gets the apartment, I get the debt from her spending sprees, and she gets to spin it all into content about finding herself and choosing happiness. I'm already seeing previews on her Instagram stories. Apparently I was holding her back from her authentic self." He pulled out his phone and showed me Vanessa's latest post. It was a picture of her in a white sweater, looking pensively out a window, with a caption about choosing growth over comfort and learning that sometimes love means letting go. The comments were full of support and encouragement, people praising her bravery and strength. Several followers mentioned how much they admired her vulnerability in sharing her journey. "She's already got sympathy gifts from sponsors," Marcus said bitterly. "Self-care packages, meditation apps, a weekend spa retreat to heal her heart. Meanwhile, I'm living in a studio apartment and eating ramen because she maxed out our credit cards on content creation equipment." I thought about the Halloween party, about the dress, about my wedding day, without my sister, about all the times I'd been told to be understanding while Vanessa got everything she wanted. "Marcus," I said slowly, "do you still have copies of the divorce papers?" He looked puzzled. "Yeah, why?" "Because I have an idea for Christmas morning." That night, I called Tyler and told him about my conversation with Marcus. I told him about the affair, the divorce, and the way Vanessa was already spinning it into profitable content about self-discovery and authentic living. "So what are you thinking?" Tyler asked. "I'm thinking it's time to stop being the bigger person," I said. I'm thinking Christmas morning is going to be very interesting this year. Tyler was quiet for a moment, then he started laughing. You know what? I love it. What do you need me to do? Christmas Eve dinner at my parents' house was a masterpiece of forced normalcy. Vanessa arrived an hour late, apologizing profusely about a last-minute video call with a potential sponsor. She looked perfectly put together, as always, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my wedding shoes. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, kissing Mom on the cheek and settling into her usual spot at the table. You know how the holidays are for content creators. Everyone wants collaboration opportunities. She didn't mention Marcus. She didn't mention the divorce. She acted like nothing had changed, except now she was single and thriving instead of married and thriving. How's married life treating you, Claire? She asked with a bright smile. You and Tyler looked so happy in those wedding photos Mom showed me. It's wonderful, I said evenly. Tyler's amazing. I'm really lucky. That's so sweet, Vanessa said. I'm honestly a little jealous. You guys seem to have figured out that whole partnership thing. Some of us are still learning how to be authentic in relationships. There it was. The subtle dig disguised as self-reflection. The implication that her failed marriage was actually a sign of personal growth, while my successful one was just luck. Mom jumped in quickly. Vanessa's been doing so well on her own. Her following has grown by 20,000 in the past 2 months, and the brand partnerships she's been getting are just incredible. That's amazing, I said, and I meant it. It was amazing how quickly she'd turned her marriage's destruction into profitable content. It's been a journey, Vanessa said with practiced vulnerability, but I'm learning so much about myself, about what I really want from life. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find your authentic self. You know? She looked directly at me when she said it, and I realized she thought I was buying into the narrative, that I believed she was the victim of a marriage that just didn't work out, rather than a woman who'd cheated on her husband and destroyed a family heirloom for Instagram likes. I'm sure that's been really hard, I said sympathetically. Divorce is never easy. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. Mom and Dad both looked confused. Oh, Vanessa said carefully. I don't think we need to use that word. Marcus and I just decided we wanted different things. It was very mutual and mature. Of course, I said. I'm sure the papers made that clear. The table went quiet. Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What papers? Dad asked. Nothing, Vanessa said quickly. Claire's just being dramatic. You know how she gets. I smiled and took a sip of wine. You're right. I do get dramatic sometimes, especially around the holiday. Christmas just makes me so sentimental about family traditions. Vanessa relaxed slightly, probably thinking I was going to bring up the dress again, that I was going to rehash old grievances and make everyone uncomfortable with my unreasonable expectations. She had no idea what I'd wrapped for her under the tree. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of weather that makes you grateful for warm houses and family tradition. Tyler and I arrived at my parents' house at 9, carrying a carefully curated selection of gifts, and one very special package wrapped in elegant silver paper with a burgundy velvet bow. Vanessa was already there, of course, setting up her phone to livestream the family gift exchange for her followers. She'd positioned herself strategically near the tree where the natural light would make her look radiant, and she was wearing a red cashmere dress that she'd probably gotten as a sponsor gift. Good morning, beautiful souls, she said to her camera with practiced enthusiasm. I'm here with my amazing family for Christmas morning, and I'm so excited to share this special moment with you all. Family is everything, and the holidays are just magical, aren't they? Mom and Dad played along, waving at the camera and making small talk about Christmas traditions, while Vanessa provided running commentary for her audience. Tyler and I settled into the background, content to let her have the spotlight for what would probably be the last time. Okay, present time, Vanessa announced, clapping her hands together. I love watching my family open gifts. It's all about gratitude and connection. You know, these are the moments that matter. We went around the circle, opening presents. Mom got a new scarf from Dad. Dad got a book from Mom. Tyler and I exchanged thoughtful but modest gifts. Vanessa opened a series of packages that were clearly brand partnerships, disguised as family presents, gushing about each item for her camera while her followers left heart emojis in the comments. Finally, it was time for my gift to Vanessa. "This one's from Claire," Mom announced, handing Vanessa the silver-wrapped package. "Ah, Claire, you shouldn't have," Vanessa said, positioning the gift so her camera could capture her opening it. "My sister always gives the most thoughtful present." She untied the burgundy bow carefully, probably planning to save it for some future craft project that would become content. She peeled back the silver paper with deliberate precision, revealing a simple white box. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What could it be?" she said to her camera with exaggerated excitement. "Well, I'm literally shaking, you guys. Claire always surprises me." She lifted the lid of the box and looked inside. Her expression didn't change immediately. She just stared, very still, like she was trying to process what she was seeing. "Vanessa?" Mom prompted. "What is it, honey?" Vanessa's face had gone completely pale. She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and pure rage. "Claire," she said very quietly, "what is this?" "It's your divorce papers," I said cheerfully. "I thought they'd make beautiful wrapping paper for next year's gifts. Very vintage, very authentic. Perfect for your aesthetic." The room went dead silent, except for the faint sound of her phone still live streaming. Tyler cleared his throat. "Actually, there's a whole set in there." Marcus was very thorough with the documentation. Vanessa's hands were shaking as she pulled out the stack of legal papers that detailed the dissolution of her marriage. Her followers could see her face clearly in the camera, watching her mask slip in real time. "Turn off the camera," she whispered. "Why?" I asked innocently. "I thought you loved sharing authentic moments with your audience. This is pretty authentic, isn't it?" "Claire, turn off the fucking camera," she hissed. "Language, honey," Mom said automatically, but she was staring at the papers in confusion. "I can't turn off your camera, Vanessa," I said reasonably. "It's your live stream, your content, your choice." She fumbled for her phone, but her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Finally, she managed to end the stream, but not before several hundred followers had watched her face crumble in real time. "What is this about?" Dad demanded, taking the papers from Vanessa's hands and scanning them quickly. "Divorce papers, Vanessa. What's going on?" "It's not what it looks like," Vanessa said desperately. "Marcus and we decided to take a break and the lawyers said." "It's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted gently. "Vanessa's been divorced for 3 weeks. She's been lying to all of us while she figures out how to spin it into content." Mom was reading over Dad's shoulder, her face growing more confused and hurt with each line. "Irreconcilable differences, infidelity." "Vanessa, what does this mean?" "It means," Tyler said helpfully, "that Vanessa cheated on Marcus with her photographer and then abandoned him with all their debts, while she turned their marriage's destruction into a personal branding opportunity." "That's not true," Vanessa said, but her voice cracked on the word. "Which part?" I asked. "The affair with Jake, the photographer, the credit card debt from all your content creation equipment, or the part where you've been pretending to be a brave single woman choosing growth over comfort while Marcus eats ramen in a studio apartment?" Vanessa looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, someone who would help her spin this back into a narrative she could control. "Mom," she said pleadingly, "you know how complicated relationships can be. Sometimes people just grow apart, and the legal stuff is just technicalities." "You lied to us," Mom said quietly. "You sat at our dinner table and talked about authenticity and growth, and you lied to our faces." "I was protecting you," Vanessa protested. "I didn't want you to worry. You were protecting your image," Dad said, his voice cold. "You were managing your brand." The silence stretched between us, thick with 30 years of unspoken truths, finally rising to the surface. "Claire," Vanessa said, turning to me with desperate eyes. "Why would you do this? We're sisters. We're supposed to support each other." I looked at her, this woman who had taken everything from me, my entire life, and expected me to smile and be grateful for the scraps, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not anger, not hurt, but absolute clarity. Support each other. I repeat, like when you destroyed our grandmother's wedding dress for Halloween content. Like when you missed my wedding for a skincare campaign. Like when you claimed a family heirloom that you never intended to honor and turned it into a prop for your zombie bride fantasy. That dress was just sitting in a closet, Vanessa said, defensively. It wasn't hurting anyone. It was hurting me, I said simply. But you never cared about that, did you? You never cared about anything except what you could get from it. Mom was crying now, quietly, looking back and forth between her daughters like she was seeing us both clearly for the first time. Vanessa, she said softly, is this true, about the dress, about Claire wanting it for her wedding? Mom, that's ancient history, Vanessa said impatiently. Claire got a perfectly nice dress. She looked beautiful. Why are we relitigating Halloween costumes? Because I said, standing up and smoothing down my sweater, that Halloween costume was supposed to be my wedding dress. That zombie bride you created for content was supposed to be me walking down the aisle to marry Tyler, and you knew that. And you destroyed it anyway, because you've never once in your life considered that I might matter as much as you do. The room was quiet except for Mom's soft crying and the sound of Dad folding the divorce papers with mechanical precision. I think Tyler said, gently, taking my hand, it's time for us to go. We gathered our coats and the gifts we'd received, leaving behind the silver wrapping paper and the burgundy bow that had contained 30 years of truth. At the door, I turned back to look at my family one last time. Vanessa was crying now, makeup streaming down her face in a way that would never make good content. Mom was holding Dad's hand, both of them looking older than they had that morning. And for the first time in my life, they were all looking at me not as the reasonable one, the understanding one, the one who would make things work, but as the one who had finally decided she was worth fighting for. Merry Christmas, I said quietly, and Tyler and I walked out into the cold December air. Behind us I could hear Vanessa's voice, high and desperate, trying to explain and justify, and spin the morning back into something she could control. But for once I didn't stop to listen. For once I didn't try to fix it or smooth it over or be the bigger person. For once I just walked away. 3 days later, Tyler and I were curled up on our couch, watching the snow fall outside our apartment window, and planning our New Year's Eve party, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Vanessa had posted a new video. The thumbnail showed her in a simple white sweater, no makeup, looking directly into the camera with what appeared to be genuine vulnerability. The title read, "My Truth, When Family Betrays." I almost deleted the notification without watching, but something made me click on it. The video was 12 minutes of Vanessa explaining how her sister had weaponized her divorce papers and ambushed her on Christmas morning. She talked about toxic family dynamics and the importance of setting boundaries with people who don't support your healing journey. She never mentioned the dress, the affair, or the lies. Instead, she painted herself as the victim of a jealous sister who couldn't handle her success. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. People shared their own stories of difficult family members and praised Vanessa for her strength in speaking her truth. Several followers offered to send her care packages and gift cards to help her through this difficult time. I watched the entire thing without feeling angry or hurt or even surprised. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced before when it came to my sister. Complete indifference. She could have her narrative. She could have her followers and her sponsors and her carefully curated version of reality. She could turn our entire family's destruction into content, and people would pay her for it, but she couldn't have me anymore. I deleted the app from my phone and went back to planning our party, thinking about the friends who would celebrate with us and the life Tyler and I were building together, one honest moment at a time. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering everything in a blanket of white that made the whole world look clean and new. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt like I was finally living in it instead of just watching from the sidelines, waiting for permission to matter. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the truth, wrapped in courage and tied with a bow made of all the patience you're finally done wasting on people who never deserved it in the first place. The wrapping paper might be unconventional, but the contents are always worth it. Tyler was already awake when I opened my eyes the morning after Christmas, sitting by the window with his coffee and watching the snow accumulate on our fire escape. The silence in our apartment, felt different from the silence at my parents' house. This was peaceful, chosen. That silence was suffocating, forced, bought with my compliance. "How are you feeling?" he asked without turning around. I stretched under the covers, taking inventory of my emotions like checking for injuries after an accident. "Free," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Terrifyingly, amazingly free. He smiled and brought me a cup of coffee, settling back into bed beside me. "No regrets about yesterday, about finally telling the truth?" "No." I took a sip and let the warmth spread through my chest. "About waiting 30 years to do it?" "Maybe." My phone had been buzzing intermittently since we'd gotten home the night before, but I'd turned it face down and ignored it. Now, in the gentle morning light, I finally picked it up to survey the damage. 17 missed calls from Mom, 12 from Vanessa, 5 from Dad, and 43 text messages ranging from desperate apologies to angry accusations, to attempts at emotional manipulation that would have worked on the old Claire. The Claire who believed that keeping peace was more important than keeping dignity. The first message from Vanessa, sent at 11:47 p.m., simply read, "How could you do this to me?" The last one, timestamped 3:23 a.m., was longer. "I know you're probably feeling vindicated right now, but you destroyed our family for what? Some stupid dress that was falling apart anyway. I hope it was worth it, Claire. I hope your petty revenge was worth losing your sister forever." I showed Tyler the messages. He read them silently, his jaw tightening with each swipe. "She still doesn't get it," he said finally. "No," I agreed. "She thinks this was about the dress. She doesn't understand that the dress was just the last straw in a lifetime of being erased." I deleted the messages without responding and blocked Vanessa's number. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work and spent the day in my pajamas, reading a book and letting Tyler make me grilled cheese sandwiches. I didn't feel guilty about it. I didn't worry about what my students would think, or whether the substitute would follow my lesson plans correct. I just existed in my own space, on my own terms for the first time in years. Around noon, Aunt Helen called. "I heard about Christmas," she said without preamble. "Your mother called me this morning in tears." I braced myself for another lecture about family loyalty and keeping the peace. "Good for you," she continued, and I nearly dropped the phone. "It's about damn time someone called out that nonsense." "Aunt Helen, sweetheart, I've been watching this dynamic for 30 years, and I've been biting my tongue because it wasn't my place. But yesterday was magnificent. Your sister needed to hear some hard truths, and your parents needed to see what their favoritism has done to both their daughters." I felt tears prick my eye. After years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too unreasonable, hearing validation from someone who'd witnessed it all felt like oxygen after holding my breath underwater. "Mom said I humiliated Vanessa in front of her followers. Your sister humiliated herself by lying to everyone for months. You just provided the receipts." Aunt Helen's voice was firm. "And frankly, that girl has been skating by on pretty privilege and manipulation for so long, she forgot that actions have consequences." We talked for an hour and she told me stories I'd never heard before. How she'd tried to intervene when I was younger, suggesting that maybe I should get the same opportunities as Vanessa. How my parents had brushed off her concerns with phrases like, "Claire is more independent," and "Vanessa needs more support." How she'd watched me shrink myself year after year to fit into the small space my family had carved out for me. "You know what the saddest part is?" she said toward the end of our conversation. "Your parents aren't bad people, they love you both. But they got so caught up in managing Vanessa's drama that they forgot you needed love too, not just expectation." After we hung up, I sat in the growing dusk of our living room and thought about that. My parents weren't villains in some melodrama, they were people who'd made choices, again and again, that prioritized one daughter's immediate needs over the other's long-term well-being. They'd created a family dynamic where love was conditional on compliance, where being reasonable meant being invisible. But understanding their motivations didn't mean I had to accept the consequences anymore. The next few days passed quietly. Tyler went back to work, and I returned to my classroom, where second graders asked me why I looked different, and seemed surprised when I told them I felt happy. I'd spent so many years carrying the weight of my family's dysfunction that I'd forgotten what my face looked like without it. On New Year's Eve, we threw the party we'd been planning. 20 of our closest friends crammed into our small apartment, eating homemade appetizers and playing games that made us laugh until our stomachs hurt. Nobody asked about Christmas or family drama. Nobody treated me like I was fragile or needed special handling. I was just Claire, Tyler's wife, an elementary school teacher who made excellent spinach dip and knew all the words to terrible pop songs from the early 2000s. At midnight, as fireworks exploded over the city, and our friends cheered and kissed their partners, I felt something I'd been chasing my whole life without realizing it. I felt like I belonged exactly where I was. 2 weeks into January, the consequences of Christmas morning began to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. The first sign was a text from Marcus, asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. We'd spoken briefly since our conversation in December, but I hadn't seen him since the divorce papers had been finalized. He looked better when we met, at Blue Mountain Cafe. Still tired, but there was something lighter about him, like he'd finally stopped carrying a weight he'd never been meant to bear. I wanted to thank you, he said after we'd ordered, for the Christmas thing. I know it probably wasn't about me, but watching Vanessa finally face some consequences for her actions, it was cathartic. How are you doing? I asked. Really? Better than I expected, he admitted. The apartment is small and the ramen gets old, but I'm sleeping through the night for the first time in months. Turns out living with someone who documents every moment of your life for public consumption is exhausting. He told me about the aftermath of Vanessa's video, how her followers had tracked down his social media accounts and flooded them with messages calling him everything from a deadbeat ex-husband to an abuser, how Vanessa had made subtle suggestions in her content that he'd been controlling and unsupportive, that she'd finally found the courage to leave a toxic situation. The funny thing is, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee, I keep waiting to be angry about it, but mostly I just feel sorry for her. She's so desperate for validation from strangers that she'll sacrifice anyone to get it. Are you going to respond? Set the record straight? Marcus shook his head. What's the point? Her followers want to believe in her story. If I defend myself, I'm just the bitter ex trying to drag down a successful woman. If I stay silent, I'm admitting guilt. There's no winning move when someone has 10 times your platform and no relationship with the truth. He was right, and we both knew. Vanessa had weaponized her influence, turning her audience into an army that would defend her without question because they were invested in the narrative she'd sold them. Besides, Marcus continued, I'm building something new now. I'm going back to school, actually, getting my teaching certificate. Turns out I like working with kids better than working in marketing. We talked for another hour, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company in a way I never had when he was married to my sister. He was thoughtful and funny and kind, qualities that had been overshadowed by his role as Vanessa's supporting character. Now that he was free to be himself, I could see why someone might fall in love with him. I could also see why Vanessa had found him boring once the novelty wore off. As we parted ways, he gave me a quick hug. For what it's worth, he said, I always thought you were the better sister. You just never acted like you knew it. That night, I told Tyler about my conversation with Marcus over dinner at our small kitchen table. We'd fallen into comfortable routines since Christmas, cooking together and talking about our days without the constant undercurrent of family stress that had colored our relationship for years. It's weird, I said, twirling pasta around my fork. I feel bad for him, but I also feel relieved. Like seeing him move on with his life proves that surviving Vanessa is possible. You're not just surviving her, Tyler pointed out. You're thriving without her. There's a difference. He was right. The past few weeks had shown me what my life looked like when I wasn't constantly managing other people's emotions or walking on eggshells to avoid conflict. I was sleeping better, laughing more, and engaging with the world from a place of confidence rather than anxiety. My students had noticed too. During parent-teacher conferences in late January, several parents commented on how much happier I seemed, how much more energy I brought to the classroom. One mother asked if I'd changed my hair or lost weight, because I looked radiant. I hadn't changed anything about my appearance. I just stopped apologizing for taking up space. The second sign that things were shifting came in early February, When Mom called for the first time since Christmas, I almost didn't answer. Tyler and I were having a quiet Saturday morning, reading the newspaper and sharing a pot of coffee, when her name appeared on my screen. We'd exchanged a few brief text messages in January, mostly about practical matters like whether I wanted any of Grandma Rose's other belongings, but we hadn't actually spoken. "Hi Mom," I said, putting the call on speaker so Tyler could hear. "Claire honey," her voice was careful, tentative. "How are you?" "I'm good, really good, actually." "That's wonderful. I'm glad." There was a pause, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about Christmas, about everything that happened, and I wanted to talk to you about it." I waited. I didn't rush to fill the silence or make it easier for her. That was the old Claire's job, and she didn't work here anymore. "I owe you an apology," Mom continued. "Several apologies actually. Your father and I have been talking, and we realized that we've been unfair to you for a very long time." "Okay," I said neutrally. "The dress situation, that was completely wrong. We should have honored your request, especially since you were actually getting married, and we should have stopped Vanessa from destroying it, regardless of what she wanted to use it for." It was a start, but it wasn't nearly enough. "What else?" I asked. Mom was quiet for a moment. "I think we got so used to Vanessa's drama that we started to take your stability for granted. We expected you to be the reasonable one, the understanding one, and we never stopped to think about what that cost you. And we're sorry. We're really truly sorry, Claire. We love you so much, and we've done a terrible job of showing it." The words I'd wanted to hear for 30 years hung in the air between us, but instead of the relief I'd always imagined I'd feel, I found myself analyzing them clinically, looking for the catch. "What about Vanessa?" I asked. Another pause. "Vanessa is struggling right now. The whole divorce situation has been very hard on her, and she's lost some sponsorship deals because of the negative attention." There it was, the pivot back to Vanessa's needs, the implicit request for me to be understanding about her struggle. "Mom," I said gently, "I'm not responsible for Vanessa's consequences anymore. If she's struggling, that's between her and the choices she made." "I know, honey. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just want you to know that she's having a hard time, and maybe, when you're ready, you could consider talking to her." "Maybe," I said, though we both knew I wouldn't, "but not now, and maybe, not ever. I need you to be okay with that." "I understand," Mom said, though her voice suggested she didn't. "Not really. Can we see you soon? Maybe have dinner, just the three of us. Your father misses you terribly." I looked at Tyler, who was watching me with pride and concern in equal measure. He nodded slightly, letting me know he'd support whatever I decided. "We can have dinner," I said finally, "but at a restaurant, not at home, and we talk about my life, not Vanessa's problems. Those are my conditions." "Of course," Mom said quickly, "whatever you need." After we hung up, Tyler reached across the table and took my hand. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Cautious," I said honestly, "and sad. I wanted that apology for so long, but now that I have it, it feels incomplete, like they're sorry they got caught, not sorry they did it." "Maybe that's all they're capable of right now," Tyler suggested. "People change slowly, if they change at all." We scheduled dinner for the following week, at a quiet Italian restaurant, downtown, neutral territory where we could have a conversation without the loaded atmosphere of childhood bedrooms and family photos. I spent the days leading up to it, thinking about what I wanted from the relationship with my parents, if anything. The old Claire would have shown up desperate to rebuild what we'd had before, ready to pretend Christmas had never happened, if it meant having her family back. But the old Claire had never really had her family to begin with. She'd had a role to play in their dysfunction, a job that required her to be small and accommodating and grateful for scraps. The new Claire wanted something different. She wanted authentic relationships, or no relationships at all. When we met at the restaurant, Mom and Dad looked older than I remembered, more fragile somehow. Dad hugged me carefully, like he was afraid I might break or disappear. Mom's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and she kept touching my arm throughout dinner as if to reassure herself that I was really there. For the first hour, we talked about safe topics. My job, Tyler's work, the weather, the renovations they were planning for their kitchen. It felt like a first date between strangers who shared a complicated history. Then Dad cleared his throat and set down his fork. Claire, he said, I want you to know that I've been thinking about your childhood, about the choices your mother and I made, and I'm ashamed of some of them. I looked at him, this man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework, and walked me down the aisle just months ago, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. We always told ourselves that you were the strong one, he continued. That you didn't need as much attention or support as Vanessa did. But that wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't true. You needed us too, and we failed you. Mom nodded, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. We got so caught up in putting out Vanessa's fires that we never noticed we were neglecting the daughter who wasn't burning the house down. The thing is, I said carefully, I was burning. Just quietly, internally, in ways that didn't inconvenience anyone else. They both winced, and I realized this was the first time they'd ever considered the cost of my compliance. What can we do? Mom asked. How do we fix this? I don't know if you can, I said honestly. I'm not the same person who needed your approval to feel worthy. I've built a life that doesn't require your validation, and I'm not willing to shrink back down to fit into the old dynamic. We don't want you to, Dad said quickly. We want to know this version of you, the one who stands up for herself and sets boundaries and doesn't apologize for taking up space. It was a nice sentiment, but I'd learned to judge people by their actions, not their words. Then here's what I need, I said. I need you to stop treating me like Vanessa's caretaker. I need you to stop expecting me to forgive her, just because you're uncomfortable with family tension. And I need you to accept that I might never have a relationship with her again, and that's not my failure as a sister. They exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that comes from decades of marriage. That's hard for us, Mom admitted. We always dreamed of having a close family, of our daughters being best friends. That dream was never realistic, I said gently. It was based on me sacrificing my needs for Vanessa's wants. That's not friendship. That's not even family. That's just dysfunction with a pretty name. We talked for another hour, and while it wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation that movies promise, it felt real in a way our relationship never had before. They were seeing me clearly for the first time, and I was seeing them as flawed people who'd made mistakes rather than the arbiters of worth I'd believed them to be for so long. When we parted ways in the restaurant parking lot, Mom hugged me tightly. I know we have a lot of work to do, she whispered, but I'm grateful you're giving us the chance to try. I'm not giving you anything, I said, not unkindly. I'm choosing to see if we can build something new together, but it has to be based on who we actually are, not who we wish we were. As Tyler and I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope, not for the relationship we'd never had, but for the possibility of creating something honest and healthy from the ashes of what we'd lost. You know what's fun? I said to Tyler, as we pulled into our parking space. What's that? For 30 years, I thought the problem was that I wasn't good enough to deserve their love, but the real problem was that their love wasn't good enough to deserve me. He smiled and kissed my forehead. Now you're thinking like the woman I married. That night, as I fell asleep in our small apartment with its mismatched furniture and walls full of photos from our actual life together, I realized something profound. I'd spent so many years trying to earn a place in my family that I'd forgotten I already had a place in the world. I was a teacher who made a difference in children's lives. I was a wife who was loved completely and without condition. I was a friend who showed up when people needed her. I was enough, exactly as I was, without apology or explanation. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that felt almost too perfect to be real. The cherry trees on our street bloomed in explosive pink clouds, and I found myself taking longer routes to work just to walk beneath them. There was something healing about witnessing beauty that asked for nothing in return, that simply existed for the joy of existing. My relationship with my parents had settled into a cautious but genuine friendship over the past 2 months. We met for dinner once a week, and the conversations had slowly shifted from careful apologies to actual interest in my life. Dad asked about my students by name now, and Mom had started texting me photos of books she thought I might enjoy. Small gestures, but they felt monumental after years of being treated like a supporting character in my own family. Vanessa remained a carefully avoided topic, though I could see the effort it took for my parents to resist mentioning her struggles. They were learning, slowly, that my emotional labor was no longer available for rent. I thought the worst of the fallout was behind us, until the morning in late March when I walked into Blue Mountain Cafe and found Vanessa sitting in my usual corner booth, looking like she'd been waiting for hours. She'd lost weight since Christmas, and not in the healthy, intentional way that her followers probably assumed. Her face was drawn, her expensive clothes hanging loose on her frame, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could fully hide. For a moment, looking at her, I felt an echo of the old protective instinct that had ruled my life for so long. Then she looked up at me with eyes full of calculated vulnerability, and I remembered exactly who I was dealing with. "Claire," she said, half rising from the booth. "Thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I blocked your number," I said evenly, not moving from the entrance. "For good reason. Please, just sit down. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." I looked around the cafe, noting the early morning crowd of regulars who came here for quiet coffee and solitude. Whatever Vanessa had planned, she'd chosen a public place where I'd be less likely to make a scene. Still calculating, still managing the 5 minutes, I said, sliding into the booth across from her, but keeping my jacket on. "Then I'm leaving." She nodded eagerly, like a performer who'd finally gotten her audience's attention. "I know you're angry with me, and I understand why. The whole Christmas thing was really intense, and I think there were a lot of miscommunications." "Stop," I interrupted. "If you're here to gaslight me about what happened, you can save it. I was there. I remember everything perfect." Her carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment. "I'm not trying to gaslight anyone. I'm trying to apologize." "Okay, apologize." She blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. I'm sorry for the dress. I'm sorry for missing your wedding. I'm sorry for the way things got so complicated between us." I waited for more, but she seemed to think that covered it. The apology was as surface level and non-specific as I'd expected, hitting all the right notes without acknowledging any actual wrongdoing. "What do you want, Vanessa?" She leaned forward, and I saw a flash of the desperation she'd been hiding behind the performance. "I need your help." There it was, the real reason for the public meeting, the careful staging, the manufactured vulnerability. "The influencer thing isn't working out the way I expected," she continued when I didn't respond. "The divorce stuff caused a lot of drama, and some of my biggest sponsors dropped. My follower count is down 30%. And the brands that are still working with me are paying half what they used to." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I meant, I was sorry that she'd built her entire identity around something so unstable. Sorry that she'd never developed any real skills or relationships to fall back on. But I wasn't sorry enough to fix it for her. "I was thinking maybe you could help me rebrand," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Your whole teacher thing. It's so authentic and relatable. If we did some sister content together, showed people that we've worked through our issues, it could be really powerful." The redemption angle always performs well. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her audacity. She wanted to monetize our reconciliation, to turn my forgiveness into content that would restore her income stream. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to pretend we've resolved our issues, so you can use our fake relationship to rebuild your brand?" "It wouldn't be fake," she protested. "We would be working through our issues, in front of the camera. It's healing, and profitable. For you, for both of us. Claire, you could build your own platform. Teacher content is huge right now. You could make more in a month than you make in a year at that school." The dismissive way she said that school told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed my actual life. My career was just a starting point for something more profitable. My students just props for potential content. "I like my job," I said. "I like my life. I like my privacy. But you could have so much more," she insisted. "You could have influence, money, option. You could travel, work from anywhere. be your own boss. I could also have strangers commenting on every aspect of my life. My relationships turned into performance art, and my self-worth dependent on algorithm changes and sponsor approval. I countered. No thank you. Vanessa's mask slipped further, revealing the frustration underneath. You're being ridiculous. This is a business opportunity. This is how the world works now. Your world. Maybe, not mine. She sat back in the booth, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. I don't understand you anymore, Claire. You used to be so supportive, so willing to help family. Now you're cold and selfish. I'm not cold, I said calmly. I'm just not available to be used anymore. There's a difference, so that's it. You're just going to abandon me when I need you most. The emotional manipulation was so blatant, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so familiar. This was the same script she'd been running for 30 years. The one that had always worked because I'd been programmed to respond to her distress with my own sacrifice. Vanessa, I said, checking my watch. Your 5 minutes are up. And to answer your question, I'm not abandoning you. I never had you to abandon. What I had was a job as your emotional support system. And I stood up and put on my gloves, noting the way her eyes filled with tears that looked real but felt calculated. Claire, please, I know I messed up, but I can change. We can fix this. You can change. I agreed, but not because I make you, and not for my benefit. If you want to fix your life, that's work you have to do yourself. I left her sitting in the booth, probably already composing the social media post about her cruel sister who'd abandoned her in her time of need. By the time I reached my car, I'd received a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Brittany, Vanessa's friend. What you just did to her was horrible. She's in pieces. Some sister you are. I deleted the message and blocked the number. Then I drove to work where I spent the day teaching 8-year-olds about kindness and boundaries, concepts that some adults never seem to master. That evening, Tyler found me in our kitchen, stress cooking enough dinner for 6 people. Rough day, he asked, surveying the spread of food I'd prepared. I told him about the ambush at the cafe, about Vanessa's business proposal, about the text from her friend. He listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. She really asked you to fake a reconciliation for content, he said when I finished. She didn't see it as faking. In her mind, performing reconciliation is the same as actually reconciling. The audience's perception is more real to her than our actual relationship. Tyler was quiet for a moment, helping me plate the excessive amount of pasta I'd made. Are you okay? Really? I considered the question seriously. I think so. It was hard, seeing her like that. Part of me wanted to help, just out of habit, but the bigger part of me knew that helping her now would just enable more of the same behavior. You're not responsible for saving her from the consequences of her choices, Tyler reminded me. I know. It's just that 30 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. Sometimes I still hear Mom's voice in my head, saying I should be the bigger person. What does your voice say? I smiled at him, this man who'd learned to ask exactly the right questions. My voice says that being the bigger person used to mean shrinking myself. Now it means standing tall and refusing to participate in dysfunction, even when it's disguised as family loyalty. 3 days later, Vanessa posted a video titled, "When Family Fails You, My Sister's Betrayal." I didn't watch it, but Aunt Helen did, and she called me that evening to give me a summary. 12 minutes of pure manipulation, she said without preamble. She painted herself as the victim, trying to heal family relationships while you were portrayed as bitter and vindictive. She even cried on camera about how you'd turned your back on family when she needed you most. How many views? I asked, curious despite myself. 200,000 and climbing. The comments are split between people supporting her and people calling bullshit. Apparently, some of her former followers have started doing their own research into the whole Christmas situation. That surprised me. What kind of research? Screenshots of old posts, timelines that don't add up, people who knew Marcus sharing their side of the story. The internet is very good at crowdsourcing the truth when someone's story doesn't hold water. I found myself feeling almost sorry for Vanessa. She'd built her brand on carefully curated authenticity, but the internet was an unforgiving audience when they sensed deception. The same platform that had made her famous could destroy her just as easily. There's something else, Aunt Helen continued. She mentioned in the video that she's planning to write a book about overcoming family trauma and toxic relationships. Let me guess, I'm the toxic relationship. Bingo. She's positioning herself as the survivor of an abusive family dynamic, with you as the primary abuser. I laughed, though it wasn't entirely humor. You have to admire the audacity. She's turning 30 years of being the golden child into a story about being the victim. The internet doesn't seem to be buying it, though. Too many people remember her previous content about how amazing and supportive her family was. The narrative shift is too dramatic to be believable. After we hung up, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for weeks. I unblocked Vanessa's social media accounts and watched the video myself. It was a masterclass in manipulation, complete with strategic tears and carefully chosen words that implied abuse without making specific accusations that could be legally challenged. She talked about feeling unsafe, expressing her true feelings, about being silenced when she tried to set boundaries, about the trauma of being rejected by family when she needed support. The comments section was a battlefield. Half the responses were variations of "You're so brave for speaking your truth," and "Blood family isn't always real family." The other half were more skeptical, with people pointing out inconsistencies in her story and asking pointed questions about her previous content. One comment thread particularly caught my attention. A user named @Real Cost of Influencing had posted a long analysis of Vanessa's monetization strategy, breaking down how she'd turned every major life event into profitable content and questioning whether the family drama was just another revenue stream. Notice how every authentic vulnerable moment conveniently aligns with periods when her engagement is dropping. The comment read, "Family reconciliation, family betrayal, it's all just different chapters in the same book she's selling." Other users had replied with their own observations, screenshots of deleted posts that contradicted her current narrative, questions about why someone truly seeking healing would do so on such a public platform, speculation about whether the entire family feud had been manufactured for content. I closed the app and deleted it from my phone again. Whether her pain was real or performed didn't matter. Either way, I wasn't responsible for fixing it. 2 weeks later, the consequences of Vanessa's video became clear when I received a call from my principal, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Claire, I need to speak with you about something sensitive," she said when I answered. "Can you come to my office before classes start tomorrow?" I spent that evening wondering what could be so urgent, and Tyler spent it reassuring me that whatever it was, we'd handle it together. The next morning, Mrs. Rodriguez closed her office door and gestured for me to sit down. Her expression was serious but not unkind. "I received several phone calls yesterday from parents who are concerned about some online content featuring you," she began carefully. My stomach dropped. "What kind of content?" "Apparently your sister posted a video that mentions you by name and makes some serious allegations about your character and behavior. Some parents are questioning whether these issues might affect your performance in the classroom." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was exactly what Vanessa had wanted. Unable to manipulate me directly, she'd found a way to attack the thing I cared about most, my career. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I can explain." She held up a hand. "Claire, I've worked with you for 6 years. I've seen how you interact with students, parents, and colleagues. I've watched you handle difficult situations with grace and professionalism. Whatever family drama is playing out online has no bearing on your abilities as an educator." The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming. "Thank you. However," she continued, "I do need to ask if there's anything you want to tell me about the situation, not because I doubt you, but because I want to make sure you have the support you need." I gave her a brief factual summary of the family conflict, focusing on the relevant details without editorializing. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding in understanding. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," she said when I finished. "Family situations can be incredibly difficult, especially when they become public. Is there anything the school can do to support you?" "Just continue to judge me by my work, not by my sister's social media posts. That won't be a problem. Your work speaks for itself." She paused, then smiled slightly. "For what it's worth, I have a sister too. Sometimes the people who know how to hurt us best are the ones who've had the most practice. That afternoon, I received an email from the district's legal department. They'd reviewed the video and determined that while it was unpleasant, it didn't constitute actionable defamation. Vanessa had been careful to stay just on the side of legal, implying rather than stating, suggesting rather than accusing, but the email also included an offer if I wanted to pursue a restraint order based on the harassment and the impact on my workplace. They would provide legal support. The district didn't tolerate threats to their employees' safety or reputation, even when those threats came from family members. I printed the email and brought it home to discuss with Tyler. "What do you want to do?" he asked after reading it. "Part of me wants to fight back," I admitted. "Part of me wants to expose every lie she's ever told, every manipulation she's ever used. But that would make me just like her, wouldn't it? Turning our relationship into a public spectacle." "There's a difference between defending yourself and attacking someone," Tyler pointed out. "You have the right to protect your reputation and your career." "I know, but I also know that engaging with her on her platform, by her rules, means she's already won. She wants me to respond. She wants me to fight back publicly, because it generates more content, more engagement, more opportunity to play the victim." Tyler nodded slowly. "So what's the alternative?" "I live my life, I do my job, I let my actions speak louder than her accusations." I set the email aside and looked at my husband, this man who'd stood by me through every revelation and boundary and difficult choice. I refused to let her turn my life into a performance. The next morning, I wrote a brief, professional email to Mrs. Rodriguez declining the legal support, but expressing my gratitude for the offer. Then I did something I'd never done before. I wrote a letter to my students' parents, not about the video or the accusations, but about my commitment to their children's education and my appreciation for their trust. I talked about our classroom goals for the rest of the year, upcoming projects, and ways parents could support their children's learning at home. I sent it out with the weekly newsletter, a normal communication that happened to remind everyone of who I actually was, beyond whatever drama might be circulating online. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Parents wrote back with expressions of support, appreciation for my dedication, and excitement about the upcoming science fair. Several mentioned that they'd seen some nonsense online, but that they judged teachers by their interactions with students, not by social media drama. One parent, whose daughter struggled with anxiety, wrote a particularly touching response. "Emma comes home every day excited about what she learned in your class. You've made her feel confident and capable in ways we didn't think were possible. That's all we need to know about your character." By the end of the week, the initial concern had faded, replaced by the normal rhythm of lesson plans and parent conferences and children learning to read. Vanessa's attempt to weaponize my career had backfired, serving only to remind my school community of the reasons they valued me. But the incident had clarified something important for me. As long as Vanessa had a platform and an audience, she would continue to find ways to insert herself into my life. She would twist every boundary I set into evidence of my cruelty, every refusal to engage into proof of my selfishness. I couldn't control her behavior, but I could control my response to it, and my response was to build a life so solid, so authentic, so filled with genuine relationships and meaningful work, that her attempts to undermine it would only highlight the emptiness of her own existence. That weekend, Tyler and I planted a garden in the small patch of earth behind our apartment building. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes and herbs and flowers that would bloom without needing an audience. As we worked in the dirt, our hands black with soil and our clothes stained with honest work, I thought about the difference between growing something real and performing growth for public consumption. Vanessa's life was all performance now, every moment curated for maximum impact and engagement. She'd forgotten how to exist without an audience, how to value experiences that couldn't be monetized or relationships that didn't serve her brand. I'd spent 30 years auditioning for a role in her story, desperate to be seen and valued and loved. But I'd finally realized that the best stories aren't performed for others, they're lived quietly, genuinely, with people who love you not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you choose to be when no one is watching. As the sun set over our small garden, casting long shadows across the neat rows we'd planted, I felt something I'd been seeking my entire life without knowing it. Not the validation of others or the approval of family, but the deep, unshakable knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged, living exactly the life I'd chosen. And that was worth more than all the followers and sponsors and public sympathy in the world. The summer heat had settled over our small town like a comfortable blanket by the time I received the call that would change everything. I was in my classroom preparing bulletin boards for the upcoming school year when Nicole from Henderson and Associates law firm called with news that made me sit down hard in my desk chair. "Claire, we've received some interesting information regarding your sister's recent activities," Nicole said, her voice carrying the careful professionalism that lawyers use when they're about to deliver bombshell news. "Are you familiar with something called influencer fraud?" I wasn't, but I was about to get a comprehensive education. Nicole explained that a former sponsor of Vanessa's had contacted their firm after discovering discrepancies in the engagement metrics she'd been reporting. What started as a routine audit had uncovered a web of deception that went far deeper than inflated follower counts. "She's been running multiple schemes," Nicole continued. "Fake giveaways where the prizes were never awarded, sponsored posts for products she never actually used, and most relevant to your situation, fabricated family drama designed to drive engagement and sympathy donations." My blood ran cold. Sympathy donations. "She set up a GoFundMe after posting that video about you, claimed she needed financial help to rebuild her life after being abandoned by her family. She's raised over $40,000 so far." I stared out the window at the playground where my students would run and laugh in just a few weeks. Children who trusted that adults would tell them the truth and treat them fairly. The contrast between their innocent world and my sister's calculated deception felt like whiplash. "There's more," Nicole said gently. "We have evidence that she's been planning this campaign for months. Screenshots of private messages with other influencers where she discusses the family trauma angle as a business strategy. She literally wrote that family conflict was underutilized content and that she was going to mine her childhood for material." The words hit me like physical blows. Every moment of our shared history, every genuine emotion I'd experienced, every painful memory I'd carried had been reduced to raw material for her content machine. Our grandmother's wedding dress, our parents' favoritism, my years of feeling invisible, all of it was just another storyline in her personal brand narrative. "What can we do about it?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Quite a lot, actual wire fraud. If she's using false pretenses to solicit donations across state lines, consumer fraud for the fake sponsorships, and potentially defamation, since we can now prove that her claims about your relationship were fabricated for financial gain." I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally see the full scope of something you've only glimpsed in pieces. This wasn't about sibling rivalry or family dysfunction anymore. This was about a person who had weaponized every relationship in her life for profit. "I need to think about this," I said. "Of course, but Claire, you should know that other people are coming forward. Marcus has agreed to testify about the fake narrative around their divorce. Several former friends have provided evidence of her manipulative behavior, and at least 3 other influencers have admitted to collaborating with her on fabricated drama for mutual benefit." After we hung up, I sat in my empty classroom for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of summer maintenance echoing through the halls. Custodians repairing desks, painters touching up walls, the quiet preparation that happens before children fill these spaces with learning and laughter. I thought about the teacher I'd become, the classroom I'd built where every child felt valued and heard. I thought about the life Tyler and I had created together, built on honesty and mutual respect. I thought about the garden we'd planted, growing quietly without fanfare or audience. Then I thought about the $40,000 that Vanessa had collected from strangers who believed they were helping a victim of family abuse. Money that could have gone to actual victims who needed genuine support. I picked up my phone and called Nicole back. "I want to move forward with everything," I said. "All of it." The legal process unfolded with surprising speed once the investigation began in earnest. Nicole had warned me that these cases could drag on for years, but Vanessa's digital trail was so extensive and so careless that building a case was almost effortless. She had documented her own deception with the same compulsive thoroughness she brought to documenting her morning smoothie. Screenshots of planning conversations, drafts of manipulative posts, even voice memos where she practiced crying on command for videos. It was all there, preserved in the digital amber of her own narcissism. The first domino fell when the Federal Trade Commission opened an investigation into her undisclosed sponsorships. Vanessa had been tagging posts as genuine recommendations while receiving payment, violating disclosure requirements that carried hefty fines. The second domino was the GoFundMe fraud investigation. The platform froze her account and began reviewing her fundraising activities dating back 2 years. They discovered a pattern of questionable campaigns, each one carefully crafted to extract maximum sympathy and minimum accountability. But the third domino was the one that brought everything crashing down. A former friend of Vanessa's, someone named Jessica, who'd appeared in numerous early videos as a supporting character in the Golden Life narrative, came forward with hours of them spanning 3 years, documenting Vanessa's real thoughts about her audience, her family, and her business model. Nicole played excerpts for me over the phone, and I had to sit down as I listened to my sister's voice, clear and cold and completely unguarded, discussing me like I was a character in a story she was writing. "Claire's always been so pathetically grateful for any attention," Vanessa said in one recording, laughing as she spoke. "I could probably get her to do anything if I just acted like I needed her. She's like a puppy that way." In another, "The family trauma thing is gold. People eat that shit up. I'm thinking of doing a whole series about growing up with a narcissistic sister. Claire's so boring and normal it'll be easy to paint her as the villain, and the most damaging. The wedding dress stunt was perfect. I knew it would break her, and broken Claire is so much more interesting than happy Claire. Plus the zombie bride photos got massive engagement. Win-win." I listened to my sister describe orchestrating my pain for profit, and something inside me finally completely broke free from the last threads of obligation and guilt that had tied me to her for 30 years. "There's more," Nicole said when the recordings ended. "She talks about your parents, your husband, even your students. She's been planning content around all of them." The recordings revealed the true scope of Vanessa's manipulation. She hadn't just been exploiting our relationship. She'd been studying everyone in my life for potential storylines. She had plans to approach my principal with fabricated concerns about my mental health. She'd researched Tyler's ex-girlfriends to see if any of them might be willing to participate in relationship drama content. She'd even considered showing up at my school to create a public confrontation that she could film. Every moment of apparent spontaneity in her content had been calculated. Every emotional breakdown had been rehearsed. Every family conflict had been engineered for maximum impact. Jessica says she started recording the conversations because she was planning to write a tell-all book. Nicole explained, "But when she saw the video about you and the fundraising campaign, she decided the evidence would be more valuable in court than in a book deal." The criminal charges were filed on a Tuesday in late July: wire fraud, consumer fraud, defamation, and a half-dozen other charges that Nicole patiently explained to me over coffee at Blue Mountain Cafe, the same booth where I'd first learned about Marcus's divorce, where Vanessa had ambushed me with her business proposal, where so much of this story had unfolded one revelation at a time. "The prosecutors are confident," Nicole said, sliding a folder across the table. "The evidence is overwhelming, and there's clear intent to defraud." She documented her own criminal activity so thoroughly that building the case is almost redundant. I opened the folder and found myself looking at screenshots of Vanessa's private messages, planning documents for her content calendar, and financial records showing the flow of money from fraudulent activity. It was like reading the business plan for a company whose product was manufactured authenticity. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait for her to respond. She'll probably try to plea bargain, claim emotional distress, maybe even attempt to blame you for driving her to these actions." Classic abuser playbook. I thought about that word abuser. I'd spent so many years thinking of our relationship in terms of sibling rivalry or family dysfunction, but the evidence laid out in this folder told a different story. This was systematic, calculated abuse designed to extract value from every interaction. "There's something else you should know," Nicole continued. "The story is going to break publicly tomorrow. A journalist from the Portland Tribune has been investigating influencer fraud, and Vanessa's case is going to be their lead story. They want to interview you." I shook my head immediately. I don't want to be part of the media circus. I understand, but you might want to consider it. This story is going to be told with or without your participation. Wouldn't you rather make sure your side is represented accurately? She was right, but the thought of turning my life into a news story, of having strangers dissect my family history for entertainment, made my skin crawl. I'd spent months building a life that existed outside of Vanessa's drama, and now I was being asked to step back into the spotlight she'd tried to force me into. Let me think about it, I said. That evening, Tyler and I sat in our small garden, surrounded by the tomatoes and herbs we'd planted in the spring. They were thriving now, heavy with fruit and fragrant with the promise of late summer harvests. Real growth, I thought, looking at the tangible results of patience and care. What are you leaning toward? Tyler asked, handing me a glass of iced tea. Part of me wants to stay completely out of it, I admitted. Let the legal system handle the criminal charges and keep my private life private. And the other part thinks about all the people who donated money to her fake fundraiser. All the genuine victims of family abuse, who might be denied help because people become cynical after being scammed. All the young women who follow influencers like her and think this behavior is normal. Tyler nodded, plucking a cherry tomato from the vine and handing it to me. There's no wrong choice here. You've already done the hardest part by standing up to her and providing evidence for the prosecution. I bit into the tomato, tasting the concentrated sweetness of something grown with intention and patience. You know what I keep thinking about? Those recordings, the way she talked about me, about all of us, like we were characters she was writing instead of people she was supposed to love. That's what narcissists do, Tyler said gently. They can't see other people as fully human. Everyone else is just an extension of their ego or a resource to be exploited. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The Portland Tribune story had been picked up by national news outlets, and my phone number had somehow been leaked in the social media frenzy that followed. The headline was everywhere. Local influencer charged with wire fraud and elaborate family drama scheme. The story laid out the charges in detail, complete with excerpts from the recorded conversations and screenshots of Vanessa's planning documents. By noon, Vanessa Donovan Exposed was trending on multiple platforms. Internet sleuths were dissecting every piece of content she'd ever posted, finding patterns and inconsistencies that revealed the calculated nature of her supposedly authentic life. The comments ranged from outrage at being deceived to sympathy for the family members she'd exploited. Several people shared their own stories of being manipulated by influencers or family members who treated relationships like business opportunities. But what struck me most were the messages from other siblings of narcissists. People who recognized the dynamic I'd described and felt less alone in their own struggles. Stories of being gaslit and scapegoated and turned into supporting characters in someone else's drama. Reading about your sister helped me understand my own family, one message said. I always thought I was crazy for feeling invisible. Thank you for speaking up. Another, my brother does the same thing, turning every family gathering into content for his YouTube channel. I've been afraid to set boundaries because I didn't want to be the bad guy. Your story gave me courage. These messages decided it for me. I called the Tribune reporter and agreed to an interview. The conversation took place in the newspaper's downtown office, a quiet space away from the chaos of social media and public speculation. The reporter, a woman named Sarah Chen, was thoughtful and professional, asking questions that focused on the systemic issues rather than salacious family drama. What do you want people to understand about this situation? She asked near the end of our conversation. I thought carefully before answering. I want them to understand that authentic relationships can't coexist with performative ones. When someone is constantly calculating the content value of every interaction, genuine intimacy becomes impossible, and I want people to know that setting boundaries with toxic family members isn't selfish, it's necessary for survival. Do you have any regrets about how this unfolded? I regret that it took me 30 years to recognize the pattern, I said honestly. I regret that other people got hurt because I didn't speak up sooner, but I don't regret standing up for myself, even though it led to all of this. The follow-up article ran the next week, focusing on the broader implications of influencer culture and the impact on families and authentic relationships. It was thoughtful and measured, treating my story as one example of a larger social phenomenon rather than gossip or entertainment. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings moved forward with methodical precision. Vanessa's lawyer attempted several defense strategies, none of which gained traction given the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and fraud. First, they claimed she was suffering from mental health issues that impaired her judgment. The recorded conversations where she clearly articulated her plans and motivations undermined this defense. Then they argued that influencer culture normalized this behavior, that she was simply following industry standards. The prosecutors countered with evidence of other influencers who maintained successful careers without resorting to fraud or exploitation. Finally, they tried to position her as a victim of family abuse who was simply telling her truth. The recordings where she admitted to fabricating the abuse claims made this defense untenable. In September, 3 months after the initial charges were filed, Vanessa accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial. She pleaded guilty to wire fraud and consumer fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence, and an agreement to pay full restitution to everyone who'd been financially damaged by her schemes. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for October, 1 year after my wedding. The symmetry felt appropriate somehow, marking the anniversary of my new beginning with the legal conclusion of my old family drama. I debated whether to attend the hearing. Nicole said my presence wasn't necessary, the case was strong enough to stand without victim impact statement. But something drew me to witness this final chapter, to see justice done for all the people who'd been hurt by my sister's calculated cruelty. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, filled mostly with lawyers and a few reporters. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table in a modest navy dress, her hair pulled back simply, looking nothing like the glamorous influencer who'd built a career on manufactured drama. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Vanessa stood and delivered what I assumed was a carefully rehearsed statement about taking responsibility for her actions and seeking to make amends. But even in her apology, I could hear the performance, the calculated pauses, the strategic tears, the carefully chosen words designed to evoke sympathy without admitting the full scope of her manipulation. She was still running a script, still playing a character, even in the face of criminal consequence. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and full restitution totaling over $100,000. He also ordered her to stay away from social media during her probation period, effectively ending her influencer career. As the bailiff led her away, Vanessa looked back at the gallery. Her eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for just a moment, the mask slipped one final time. What I saw there wasn't remorse or sadness, or even anger. It was confusion, as if she genuinely couldn't understand how performing her life instead of living it had led to this moment. I felt something I'd never expected to feel looking at my sister. Pity. Not the kind that makes you want to rescue someone, but the deep sadness of recognizing a person who'd lost themselves so completely in their own performance that they'd forgotten who they actually were underneath it all. Outside the courthouse, Nicole walked me to my car through a small crowd of reporters and internet personalities who'd come to witness the conclusion of their former colleague's downfall. "How do you feel?" she asked, as we reached the parking garage. "Empty," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Not sad or angry or vindicated, just empty, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I don't know what to do with my hands now that I've finally put it down. Nicole smiled. "That's normal. You've been in survival mode for so long that peace feels foreign. It'll take time to adjust to not being under attack." As I drove home through the familiar streets of our small town past the school where I taught and the cafe where so much of this story had unfolded, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been desperate for my family's approval, willing to accept scraps of affection in exchange for my silence and compliance. Now I was married to a man who loved me completely, surrounded by friends who valued my actual company, and successful in a career that brought meaning to my days. I'd built a life that didn't require anyone else's permission or approval to exist. The legal victory felt anticlimactic compared to the personal transformation it represented. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I'd learned to serve myself, not in the selfish way Vanessa had always prioritized her own needs, but in the healthy way that recognizes self-preservation as the foundation for all other forms of love. That evening, Tyler and I harvested the last tomatoes from our garden, their weight solid and real in our hands. As we worked in the fading light, I thought about the difference between what grows naturally and what performs growth for an audience. Our garden hadn't generated a single social media post or dollar of revenue. No one had documented our planting or weeding or watering, but the tomatoes were real, and the satisfaction of growing them was real, and the quiet contentment of sharing the harvest with our neighbors was real. I'd spent 30 years auditioning for a love that was always conditional, always contingent on my willingness to make myself smaller so someone else could appear larger. But real love, I'd learned, doesn't require performance. It thrives in the quiet spaces between people who see each other clearly and choose each other anyway. As the sun set over our small garden, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, I felt something I'd been seeking my entire life without knowing its name. Peace. Not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep, unshakable peace of knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I'd learned to serve something far more valuable, the truth of my own worth independent of anyone else's ability to recognize or celebrate it. 2 years after the sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through Nicole's office, federal prison mail with Vanessa's inmate number stamped in the corner. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the hope that prison had given her the clarity that freedom never had. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Vanessa's familiar handwriting but with none of her usual theatrical flair, no dramatic flourishes or calculated vulnerability, just words on paper that felt, for the first time in my memory, completely genuine. "Claire," it began, "I don't expect you to read this, and I definitely don't expect you to respond, but my therapist here says that making amends requires taking responsibility without expecting anything in return. So here I am, trying to do something I should have done decades ago." She wrote about the therapy sessions that had forced her to confront the reality of her actions, about learning the clinical terms for behaviors she'd always rationalized as survival or creativity, about understanding, finally, that turning people into content wasn't just unethical, it was a form of dehumanization that had hollowed out her capacity for genuine connection. "I know saying sorry doesn't undo the damage," she continued. "I know it doesn't give you back your wedding dress, or your childhood, or the years you spent thinking you weren't good enough, but I need you to know that none of it was about your worth. It was about my inability to see anyone else as real, including myself." The most surprising part came near the end. I've been off social media for 18 months now, and I'm starting to remember what it feels like to exist without an audience. It's terrifying and wonderful, and completely foreign. I'm learning to have thoughts without immediately calculating their content value. I'm learning to feel emotions without performing them. It's like being a person for the first time since I was 12 years old. She didn't ask for forgiveness or suggest that we rebuild our relationship. She simply acknowledged the harm she'd caused and took full responsibility for it, without deflection or justification or the subtle manipulations that had characterized every other apology she'd ever offered. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer where I kept important documents. Not because I was ready to reconcile, but because it represented something I'd never thought I'd see: my sister taking accountability without expecting anything in return. Tyler found me sitting quietly in our kitchen that evening, the letter still on my mind. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Grateful," I said, surprising myself with the answer. Not because she apologized, but because it confirms that the person I thought she could be was always there, just buried under layers of performance and desperation for attention. "Does it change anything for you?" I considered the question seriously. "It changes my understanding of what happened, but it doesn't change my boundaries. She's still not safe for me to have a relationship with. Maybe she never will be, but now I know that the cruelty wasn't inherent to who she is. It was a choice she made over and over until it became a pattern she couldn't break. 3 months later, my parents invited Tyler and me for Sunday dinner. It had become a monthly tradition, these careful meals where we slowly rebuilt trust and learned to relate to each other as adults, rather than as actors playing the roles of functional family. Over dessert, Mom brought up the letter. Vanessa wrote to us too, she said quietly. She asked us not to tell you, but I think you should know. She said she doesn't expect us to visit or write back. She just wanted us to understand that her behavior wasn't our fault, and it wasn't yours either. Dad nodded, looking older but somehow lighter than he had during the worst of the family conflict. She took responsibility for creating the dynamic that hurt everyone. Said she'd been manipulating situations to maintain her position as the center of attention since she was a child, and we'd enabled it because we thought we were helping. How do you feel about that? I asked. Relieved, Mom admitted, and ashamed. We spent so many years making excuses for her behavior while expecting you to just accept it. We told ourselves we were protecting her, but we were really protecting ourselves from having to deal with the consequences of her action. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had as a family, honest, uncomfortable, and completely free of the careful performances that had characterized our interactions for decades. We talked about the patterns we'd all participated in, the roles we'd played, and the harm we'd caused each other in the name of keeping peace. I don't know if we can undo 30 years of dysfunction, Dad said as the evening wound down, but I hope we can build something healthier from here. We already are, I said, looking around the table at these people who'd learned to see me clearly for the first time. This conversation, this honesty, this is what a real family looks like. The seasons continued their rhythm around our small life. Tyler got a promotion that came with more responsibility and better benefits. I was selected to pilot a new reading program that brought therapy dogs into classrooms to help anxious children feel safe enough to learn. Our garden expanded, and we started sharing vegetables with neighbors who became friends. On quiet evenings, we talked about the possibility of starting a family of our own. The idea both thrilled and terrified me, not because I doubted Tyler's love or my own capacity for motherhood, but because I was determined to break the generational patterns that had shaped my childhood. What if I mess it up? I asked one night as we lay in bed, listening to rain against the windows. You won't, Tyler said with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing someone deeply. You know what healthy love looks like because you've learned to give it to yourself. That's the hardest part. He was right. Learning to value my own needs, to set boundaries without guilt, to exist fully without apology. These skills would serve any children we might have far better than the people-pleasing and conflict avoidance I'd mastered in my original family. In the spring, we planted fruit trees in our backyard, apple and cherry and pear, varieties chosen not for their productivity or disease resistance, but simply because we loved their blossoms. Trees that would take years to mature, that would outlive us both, that would feed people we'd never meet. As I pressed the small saplings into the earth, I thought about the difference between instant gratification and sustainable growth. Vanessa had built her entire life around immediate rewards, likes, follows, revenue, attention, but everything she'd accumulated could disappear with a single algorithm change or public scandal. The trees we planted wouldn't bear fruit for years, but when they did, that fruit would be real. No filters, no staging, no carefully curated presentation required, just sweetness grown patiently in soil we'd prepared with our own hands. On the second anniversary of my wedding, Tyler and I renewed our vows in our backyard. Not because our marriage needed renewal, but because we wanted to celebrate how much we'd both grown since that first ceremony, the one where my sister's absence had cast a shadow over what should have been pure joy. This time, there were no shadows. Just 20 of our closest friends, Aunt Helen officiating with a license she'd gotten online, and vows we'd written ourselves about the people we'd become together. 2 years ago, I married the woman I thought you were, Tyler said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. Today, I'm marrying the woman you've become. Braver, stronger, more yourself than ever before. I can't wait to see who you become next. When it was my turn, I looked out at the faces surrounding us, People who loved us not for what we could provide them, but for who we chose to be, when no one was watching. I used to think love was something you earned by being perfect. But you taught me that love is something you build by being honest. Thank you for loving my flaws, celebrating my growth, and never asking me to be smaller so you could feel bigger. As our friends cheered and threw flower petals from our own garden, I felt something I'd been chasing my entire life without knowing it: complete belonging. Not the performance of belonging that comes from playing roles others have written for you, but the deep, unshakable knowing that you are exactly where and who you're supposed to be. Later that evening, as Tyler and I cleaned up paper plates and collected borrowed chairs, I found myself thinking about Vanessa, not with anger or sadness, but with a kind of distant compassion. She was somewhere learning to be human without an audience, and I hoped she'd find her way to the kind of peace that comes from being genuinely seen and valued. But whether she did or didn't, whether she changed or remained trapped in patterns that had already cost her everything, my peace no longer depended on her choices. I'd built a life that belonged to me, filled with people who chose to love me not because I made their lives easier, but because I made their world richer simply by being in it. The last light of evening filtered through our fruit trees, casting long shadows across the garden we'd planted together. In a few years, those trees would bloom with flowers that attracted bees and butterflies, then bear fruit that we'd share with neighbors and friends. Growth that was slow but sustainable, beautiful but not performed, valuable in ways that couldn't be measured in metrics or monetized for content. As Tyler and I walked hand in hand toward our small house, I thought about the wedding dress that had started this whole journey. Grandma Rose's gown, destroyed for a Halloween costume, that had generated thousands of likes and lasted one night. All that history, all that love, reduced to digital approval from strangers who forgot about it before they finished scrolling. But the love Tyler and I had built wasn't disposable or performative. It was the kind that grew stronger with time, that deepened with honesty, that flourished in the quiet moments between public celebrations. The kind of love that didn't need an audience to validate its worth. Inside our home, surrounded by photos of real moments and furniture that prioritized comfort over aesthetics, I finally understood what I'd been searching for all those years. Not the approval of people who saw me as supporting cast in their personal drama, but the deep satisfaction of being the author of my own story, and what a beautiful story it was turning out to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.